5 days after I arrived at my son's lake cabin, the property caretaker grabbed my arm, his eyes filled with terror, and shouted, "Get out of here before your son returns from his fishing trip. Follow me to the boathouse. There's something you need to see immediately." I almost fainted when I saw what was stored there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. I've learned that age brings many things: patience, wisdom, and an unfortunate talent for sensing when something is terribly wrong. At 63, I thought I'd seen enough of life's complications. I was mistaken. The invitation from my daughter-in-law came in late September, just as the Virginia countryside where I lived was turning copper and gold. "Mom, please come stay at the lake cabin for a week," she'd written in her careful script. "Mason bought it 6 months ago and we're finally getting it fixed up. The fall colors are spectacular, and you need a break." She was right about needing a break. Since my husband Edward passed 2 years ago, I'd thrown myself into maintaining our small farm, perhaps too vigorously for a woman my age. My joints complained each morning, but the work kept the loneliness at bay. The cabin sat on Lake Thornton in the Blue Ridge Mountains, 3 hours from my home. Victoria picked me up on a crisp Monday morning, her silver sedan gleaming in my driveway. She looked tired, I noticed. Shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "How's the family?" I asked as we drove through winding mountain roads. "Busy." She kept her eyes on the road. "Mason's been spending a lot of time at the cabin. Says he needs to oversee the renovations personally. My son Mason, always meticulous about his investments. At 38, he'd built a successful consulting firm in Richmond. The lake property was supposed to be a family retreat, a place where his 2 teenage boys could escape their screens and reconnect with nature. And the boys? Are they excited about the cabin? Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They haven't seen it yet. Mason wants everything perfect first. Something in her tone made me file that information away. A small puzzle piece I didn't yet know how to place. The cabin revealed itself gradually as we descended toward the lake. A sprawling cedar structure with a green metal roof, nestled among towering pines. A long dock stretched into water so clear I could see the rocky bottom. A boathouse sat at the dock's end, weathered but sturdy. "It's beautiful," I breathed. "It needs work," Victoria said quickly. "The previous owner let things go." Mason emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on his jeans. My son had inherited his father's tall frame and serious demeanor, but lately he'd developed a perpetual furrow between his brows that worried me. "Mom!" He embraced me, and I caught the scent of sawdust and lake water. "Thanks for coming. I could use another pair of eyes on this place." "Another?" I raised an eyebrow. "The caretaker, Frank Holmes. He lives in a cottage on the property. Older guy, knows everything about the lake. He's been invaluable." That evening, as Victoria prepared dinner in the cabin's modernized kitchen, I walked down to the dock. The September air carried a chill, promising an early autumn. The boathouse door stood slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. I was about to investigate when a shadow moved beside me. "Mrs. Caldwell?" I startled. A man in his 70s stood there, weathered face creased with concern. He wore a faded work jacket and carried a fishing rod. "Frank Holmes," he said, offering a calloused hand. "The caretaker. Didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't," I lied, my heart still racing. "Beautiful evening." "Yes, ma'am." He glanced toward the boathouse, then back at me. His next words came out rushed, almost nervous. "Your son's a good man, taking on this property. Previous owner, well, some folks around here had concerns about him." "What kind of concerns?" Frank's eyes darted toward the cabin, where I could see Mason's silhouette moving past a window. "Maybe nothing. Small-town gossip mostly. But if you're staying a while, just keep your eyes open." Before I could ask more, he tipped his hat and melted back into the twilight. The next 4 days passed pleasantly enough. Mason worked on replacing rotted deck boards while Victoria and I organized the cabin's interior. The previous owner had left surprisingly little: some furniture, a few boxes in the basement, nothing personal. It was as if he'd wanted to erase his presence completely. On the 5th morning, Mason announced he was taking his fishing boat out early. "There's a spot near the North Cove where the bass are running. I'll be back by noon." I spent the morning on the porch with my coffee and a book, enjoying the solitude. Around 10 o'clock, Frank appeared at the foot of the porch steps. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to speak with you. Privately." Something in his voice made my stomach clench. "Of course. Would you like to come inside?" "No." He glanced over his shoulder at the empty driveway. Victoria had driven into town for supplies. "Come with me, quickly, before your son gets back." Every instinct screamed caution, but something in Frank's terrified expression compelled me to follow. He led me down to the dock at a pace that left me breathless. When we reached the boathouse, he fumbled with the padlock. "I shouldn't have keys to this," he muttered. "But after what I found yesterday, after what I put together, Frank, what is this about?" He yanked open the door. The interior was dim, smelling of wood and water. Fishing equipment lined the walls, rods, nets, tackle boxes. Everything appeared normal until Frank pulled aside a canvas tarp in the corner. My breath caught. Beneath the tarp lay stacks of plastic-wrapped packages, dozens of them, along with what looked like ledgers and waterproof document cases. Even from a distance, even without touching anything, I knew this was wrong. Terribly, dangerously wrong. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Mason wouldn't—" "No, ma'am, I don't think he would." Frank's voice cracked. "That's the problem. I don't think your son knows this is here. But others do." "Others?" "Sheriff's department came sniffing around 2 weeks ago, asking questions about the property, about the new owner. They're watching, Mrs. Caldwell. They think your son is continuing what the previous owner started." My legs threatened to give out. I gripped the doorframe. "What did the previous owner do?" Frank's face was grave. "Nathan Garrett used this property as a distribution hub. Contraband coming up from the southern routes, heading north. Small time, but steady. When he died suddenly last spring, the operation went dark. Now someone's revived it, and the law thinks it's your son. That's impossible. Mason is an investment consultant who travels frequently, who bought this property through a private sale, who spends long hours here alone." Frank's words were gentle but devastating. "From the outside, ma'am, it looks exactly like what it's meant to look like." The sound of a boat motor cut through the morning air. "He's coming back early." Frank grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Get out of here before your son returns from fishing. Follow me to the boathouse." He stopped, realizing we were already there. "You've seen it now. But there's more. Something you need to see immediately." He pulled out a waterproof folder from behind a loose board I hadn't noticed. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos of Mason at the property, time-stamped and dated. And beneath those, older photos of Nathan Garrett, who looked eerily similar to Mason. Tall, dark-haired, same build. I almost fainted when I realized what I was seeing. Someone had been carefully documenting the property for months, creating a visual timeline that could easily confuse Mason with Garrett from a distance. But what I discovered as I flipped through the folder was even worse. Evidence that someone was actively framing my son, using the cabin's illicit history and Mason's unfortunate resemblance to Garrett to build a case against him. Bank records with forged signatures. Shipping manifests with dates that coincided with Mason's visits. Communication logs that had been fabricated. The boat motor grew louder. "He can't know you were here," Frank hissed, shoving the folder back into its hiding place and replacing the tarp. "Not yet. Not until we understand who's behind this." We stumbled out of the boathouse just as Mason's boat rounded the point. Frank melted away toward his cottage, leaving me standing on the dock, my mind reeling with terrible knowledge. My son was being mistaken for the former owner of the property, a man who had used this lakeside location for illicit activities. Mason had bought that cabin less than 6 months prior, innocent and unaware. Now I would have to help him prove his innocence, without letting on that I knew anything at all. As Mason waved from the approaching boat, a cheerful smile on his unsuspecting face, I forced myself to wave back. But my hands were shaking, and in my pocket, my fingers found the small business card Frank had slipped me in those final seconds. It bore only a phone number and 3 words. "Don't trust anyone." The pieces of a conspiracy were beginning to take shape. And I had just stumbled into the middle of a deadly game where my son was the unwitting pawn. Worse still, I had no idea who was moving the pieces, or how far they would go to win. I didn't sleep that night. Mason had returned from fishing in high spirits, showing off 3 bass he'd caught. We'd grilled them for dinner while he talked enthusiastically about finishing the deck by winter. Victoria had smiled and nodded, but I caught her watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read, worry mixed with something else. Resignation, perhaps. Now, at 3 a.m, I sat at the cabin's kitchen table with chamomile tea growing cold in my cup. Through the window, I could see the boathouse, its dark shape hulking against the moonlit water. Inside it, evidence that could destroy my son's life. Frank's business card lay before me. I'd memorized the number but hadn't called. "Don't trust anyone," he'd written. Did that include Victoria? My own daughter? I thought about the photographs, the forged documents. Someone had been planning this for months, possibly since before Mason even bought the property. That level of premeditation spoke to resources and patience. It also raised a terrifying question. What did they want? "Mom!" I jumped, nearly knocking over my tea. Victoria stood in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, moving to the counter to start the coffee maker. "This place has that effect sometimes. Too quiet, if that makes sense." "It does." I watched her carefully. "Victoria, what do you know about the previous owner?" Her hand stilled on the coffee canister. "Nathan Garrett? Not much. Why?" "Just curious. It seems strange that someone would sell such a beautiful property for what Mason paid." "He didn't sell it. He died." Victoria measured coffee grounds with unnecessary precision. "Heart attack, I think. His estate liquidated everything quickly. Mason got lucky with the timing." Lucky. The word felt bitter in my mouth. Did Mason ever meet him? Before the purchase? No. It was all handled through lawyers and a real estate agent. Victoria turned to face me, her expression guarded. "Mom, what's this about?" I made a decision in that moment, perhaps the wrong one. "Nothing specific. Frank mentioned something yesterday about local gossip regarding the property. I wondered if you'd heard anything." Victoria's face hardened. "Frank Holmes talks too much. The locals here resent outsiders buying lakefront property. That's all it is, small-town prejudice." But her voice carried an edge that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Before I could press further, headlights swept across the windows. A vehicle was coming up the long driveway at an unusual hour. Victoria moved to the window, her body tense. Who would come at this time? The vehicle, a dark SUV, parked near the cabin. 2 men emerged, both wearing casual clothes that didn't quite hide their official bearing. The shorter one knocked on the door with authority. "I'll get it," Victoria said quickly, but I was already moving. I opened the door to find 2 men holding badges. The shorter one, maybe 45 with gray-flecked hair, spoke first. "Sorry to disturb you so late. I'm Detective Harris and this is Detective Simmons. We're looking for Mason Caldwell." "He's asleep," I said, blocking the doorway. "What's this regarding?" "Just some questions about the property. Routine follow-up." Harris's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We spoke with the previous owner's family, and some items are missing from the estate inventory. We're checking with the new owner to see if anything was left behind." It was a lie. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't about missing furniture or forgotten belongings. "My son bought this property legally through an estate sale," I said calmly. "I'm sure he has all the paperwork." "I'm sure he does, ma'am." Simmons, the taller detective, tried to peer past me into the cabin. "Still, we'd appreciate a quick conversation. Won't take long." "At 3 a.m? Victoria appeared beside me, her voice sharp. "You can come back at a reasonable hour with an appointment." Harris's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm Mason's wife, and unless you have a warrant, you can leave our property." The 2 detectives exchanged glances. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Of course," Harris said smoothly. "We'll be in touch to schedule something. Have a good evening, ladies." We watched them drive away in silence. Only when the taillights disappeared did Victoria turn to me, her face pale. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she whispered. "What do you mean?" "Mom, I need to show you something." But you have to promise not to tell Mason. Not yet. She led me to the cabin's small office, where Mason kept his business files. From a locked drawer, she had a key, I noted. Victoria pulled out a folder stuffed with documents. These started arriving 2 months ago, she said, spreading papers across the desk. Anonymous tips sent to our house, police reports about Nathan Garrett, articles about smuggling operations on this lake, and letters. I picked up one of the letters. The message was brief, printed on plain paper. Ask your husband what he really does at the lake house. There are more, Victoria said, her voice breaking. Some came to Mason's office, some to our home. One even went to his business partner. Did you tell Mason? Of course. He laughed it off as someone trying to sabotage a business competitor. But then the police started showing up, asking questions about his travel schedule, his finances. She sank into a chair. Mom, someone is systematically trying to destroy him, and I don't know why. I thought of the boathouse, the evidence Frank had shown me. Victoria didn't know about that yet. Should I tell her? Has Mason noticed anything unusual at the property? I asked carefully. Anything out of place or suspicious? He's barely been inside the boathouse. Says it needs structural work before we can use it. Victoria looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. You think there's something there, don't you? That's why you asked about Garrett. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. They're watching the cabin. Cameras on the access road. Check your son's truck. They planted something yesterday. My blood ran cold. I showed Victoria the message. Who sent this? She demanded. I don't know. Another lie, but necessary. I needed to talk to Frank before involving Victoria further. We should wake Mason, Victoria said, standing abruptly. No. I grabbed her arm. Think about it. If someone planted something in his truck and we find it now, in the middle of the night right after police showed up, that looks like tampering. Like we were warned. Then what do? We wait until morning. We act normal. And we figure out who's behind this before we make any moves. I tried to sound confident, but inside I was terrified. Do you trust me? Victoria studied my face for a long moment. I trust you more than anyone. But Mom, if Mason's in real danger, then we need to be smart, not reactive. That's what they want. For us to panic, to make mistakes. She nodded reluctantly. We returned to our rooms, but I knew neither of us would sleep. At dawn, I dressed quietly and slipped outside. The morning mist hung over the lake like a shroud. I walked toward Frank's cottage, trying to appear casual in case anyone was watching. Frank opened the door before I could knock. His face was haggard, as though he hadn't slept either. You sent the text, I said without preamble. Had to warn you. They moved faster than I expected. He pulled me inside quickly. Did you check the truck? Not yet. Frank, who are they? Who's doing this? That's what I've been trying to figure out. He moved to a desk covered with papers and photographs. Nathan Garrett wasn't working alone. He had partners, suppliers, distributors. When he died, that network fell apart. Someone's trying to rebuild it, but they need the property to do it. But Mason owns it now. Exactly. So they're trying to force him out, or frame him so thoroughly that he has no choice but to sell quickly and quietly to avoid prosecution. Frank pointed to a photograph of a man in an expensive suit. This is Raymond Price. He's a lawyer in Richmond, represented several property developers. He was also Garrett's attorney. You think he's behind this? I think he's connected. 3 weeks ago, he approached Mason about selling the property, offered double what Mason paid. But it shouldn't have been for sale in the first place, Victoria interjected, her lawyer's mind connecting the dots. The judge overseeing Garrett's estate was suspicious of Price. He ordered a public auction to ensure a fair market price and keep Price from just snapping it back up. Mason's was the winning bid. He frustrated Price's plan to reacquire the property discreetly. Frank nodded in agreement. Exactly. And that's when things escalated. The anonymous letters, the police attention. It all started after Mason turned down that offer. My heart sank. Mason didn't mention that. Because he refused immediately. Told Price the cabin wasn't for sale at any price. Frank's expression was grim. That's when things escalated. The anonymous letters, the police attention. It all started after Mason turned down that offer. We need proof. We need more than proof. We need to understand what's actually in that boathouse and who put it there. Frank pulled out a set of keys. Tonight, when your son takes his evening walk, he does that every night around 8. We search that boathouse properly. We document everything, but we don't touch anything. And then we figure out who we can trust in law enforcement. Because not everyone in the sheriff's department is on the take, but someone clearly is. I left Frank's cottage with my mind spinning. As I approached the cabin, I saw Mason loading fishing gear into his truck bed. This was my chance. "Morning, Mom," he called cheerfully. "Want to come fishing with me? The early bite should be good. Maybe later." I moved closer, scanning the truck bed while pretending to admire his rods. "You've certainly accumulated a lot of equipment. Victoria says I'm obsessed." He grinned. "She's probably right." Then I saw it. A small GPS tracker, magnetic, attached to the underside of the truck bed's rail. Exactly where someone could place it in seconds while walking past the vehicle. I must have made a sound because Mason turned. "Mom, you okay?" "Fine. Just a bit stiff from the cold." I forced a smile. "You go ahead. I'll have breakfast ready when you get back." As Mason drove away, tracker and all, I realized the full scope of what we were facing. This wasn't just about framing my son for Garrett's crimes. Someone wanted this property badly enough to orchestrate an elaborate conspiracy involving forged evidence, police surveillance, and sophisticated tracking. The question that haunted me as I walked back inside: what was really in that boathouse? And more importantly, what were they willing to do to get it? Victoria met me at the door, her phone in her hand and her face ashen. "Mom," she whispered, "Mason's business partner just called. The FBI contacted him asking questions about Mason's recent cash transactions and travel patterns. They're building a federal case." The net was tightening faster than I'd feared. We had hours, not days, to act. And I still didn't know who I could trust besides Frank, a man I'd met only 5 days ago. The call from Mason's business partner changed everything. Victoria paced the cabin's living room, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled hand. They asked David about cash withdrawals Mason made over the past 6 months. Specific amounts, specific dates. How would they even know about those? "Bank records," I said quietly. "Someone's been watching his finances closely." David said the agents seemed to already have answers. They were testing him, seeing if he'd lie to protect Mason. Victoria stopped pacing and looked at me with desperate eyes. "Mom, they're building a case. A real case. What do we do?" I thought of the GPS tracker on Mason's truck, now broadcasting his location to whoever was orchestrating this nightmare. Every move we made was likely being monitored, every conversation potentially recorded. "We need to talk to Mason," I said. "All of us together. No more secrets. He'll never believe he has to, and we have to do it somewhere they can't listen." I glanced at the cabin walls, suddenly paranoid. Frank's cottage. He's the only one who understands what's really happening. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Mason should be back within the hour. But Mom, if we're wrong about Frank, if he's part of this, then we're already lost." It was a grim assessment, but true. Mason returned at 9:30 with another impressive catch. His cheerful demeanor cracked when he saw our faces. "What happened?" he demanded, setting down his fishing gear. "We need to talk," Victoria said. "Privately, at Frank's cottage." "Frank's cottage? What does the caretaker have to do with—" "Everything," I interrupted. "Mason, please, trust us." Something in my voice must have convinced him. 10 minutes later, the three of us walked through morning sunlight toward Frank's cottage, trying to appear casual. I felt eyes watching us. Real or imagined, I couldn't tell anymore. Frank answered our knock immediately, his weathered face grave. "Come in quickly." His cottage was small but neat, the walls covered with maps of the lake and surrounding properties. A laptop sat open on a cluttered desk, displaying what looked like property records. "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Mason asked, his patience clearly fraying. I took a deep breath. 5 days ago, Frank showed me something in the boathouse, something that was left behind, or planted, by whoever used this property before you bought it. Mason's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Your son is being framed, Frank said bluntly. Someone wants everyone to believe you're continuing Nathan Garrett's smuggling operation. They've planted evidence, forged documents, and fed information to law enforcement to build a case against you. That's insane. Mason looked at Victoria, then me. You can't seriously believe. There's a GPS tracker on your truck, I said quietly, placed there within the last 2 days. And the FBI is investigating your financial transactions. The color drained from Mason's face. He sank into a chair, his hands trembling. This can't be happening. I bought this place legally. I've done nothing wrong. That's what makes you the perfect target, Frank said, pulling out the folder of photographs and documents. You look enough like Nathan Garrett to be mistaken for him in surveillance photos. You travel frequently for work. You've made regular trips to the property. On paper, you fit the profile perfectly. Mason stared at the evidence, his expression shifting from disbelief to horror. Why? Why would someone do this? Because they want the property, I said, and they need you desperate enough to sell it quickly, before any prosecution begins. Raymond Price, Victoria whispered. The lawyer who offered to buy the cabin. You said he seemed too eager, too pushy. Frank nodded. Price was Garrett's attorney. I think he knows what's hidden here. Something valuable enough to orchestrate this entire scheme. Hidden where? Mason demanded. I've been over every inch of this property. Not every inch. Frank stood, his expression resolute. We need to search the boathouse properly. Tonight, after dark. Document everything we find, but don't move anything. We need evidence of the evidence. Proof that someone planted it after you bought the property. This is crazy, Mason muttered, but his eyes showed he was beginning to accept the nightmare's reality. What if we just call the police? Explain everything? Some of the police are involved, Frank said grimly. Those detectives who came last night, Harris and Simmons, they're not from the local sheriff's office. I checked. They're private investigators posing as law enforcement. The revelation hit like a physical blow. That's illegal, Victoria said. So is framing an innocent man for smuggling. Frank pulled up a document on his laptop. I've been doing research. Nathan Garrett died 6 months ago, officially from a heart attack. But there was no autopsy, and the death certificate was signed by a doctor who retired 2 weeks later and moved to Mexico. You think Garrett's death wasn't natural? I said slowly. I think someone wanted him gone and his operation shut down temporarily. Then they could restart it with a new frontman, except Mason refused to play along by refusing to sell. Mason stood abruptly, agitation rolling off him in waves. This is insane. We should contact the real FBI, the state police, someone. With what evidence? Frank challenged. Right now, all the evidence points to you. We contact authorities now. You'll be arrested within hours. We need leverage first. He's right, I said, though every maternal instinct screamed to protect my son immediately. Mason, we need to know what we're dealing with before we act. My son looked at me with fear and trust warring in his eyes. What do you think we should do, Mom? The question carried weight beyond the immediate crisis. Mason was asking me to lead, to make decisions that could save or destroy him. At 63, I'd never felt the responsibility of age more acutely. We search the boathouse tonight, I said firmly. We document everything, and then we figure out who Raymond Price really is and what he's after. I can help with that, Victoria said quietly. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. After Price approached Mason, I did some digging. He represents a development company called Lakeshore Ventures. They've been buying up waterfront properties all around Lake Thornton for the past 2 years. Development? Frank's expression sharpened. What kind of development? Luxury resorts, supposedly, but they've been secretive about their plans. Victoria showed us her phone screen displaying a news article. There's opposition from environmental groups. Something about the lake's water table and protected wetlands. I studied the article, a suspicion forming in my mind. What if it's not about development at all? What if that's just the cover story? For what? Mason asked. Before anyone could answer, Frank's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face went rigid. It's the county sheriff, the real one. He answered, putting it on speaker. Dalton here. Frank, it's Sheriff Dalton. I need to ask you about the Caldwell property. We've received a complaint from a federal agency about suspected illegal activity. I'm going to need to bring Mason Caldwell in for questioning. My heart stopped. When? Frank asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his jaw. This afternoon. I'm sending deputies at 3 o'clock. Tell him to cooperate fully and it'll go easier. A pause. Frank, I've known you 20 years. Is there something I should know about this situation? Frank met my eyes across the room. This was the moment. Trust the local sheriff or assume everyone was compromised. Sheriff, Frank said carefully, I think you should come alone first, before the deputies. There's information about the previous owner you need to hear. Another pause, longer this time. I'll be there at 1 o'clock. Just me. And Frank. This better be good. The call ended. We stared at each other in the heavy silence. You just bet everything on Dalton being clean, Mason said. I've known him since he was a deputy, Frank replied. He's honest. If anyone can help us, it's him. And if you're wrong, Victoria whispered, then Mason will be arrested this afternoon, and we'll have revealed what we know to the wrong person. Frank's expression was grim but determined. But we're out of time and options. We need an ally in law enforcement, and Dalton's our best shot. I looked at the clock. It was 10:47 a.m. We had 2 hours and 13 minutes before the sheriff arrived. 2 hours to prepare evidence, arguments, and prayers that we weren't making a fatal mistake. We need to search the boathouse now, I said, before Dalton arrives. Whatever's there, we need to document it immediately. In broad daylight? Mason protested. We don't have the luxury of waiting for darkness. I stood, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Victoria, you stay here and prepare a timeline of everything suspicious. The letters, the police visits, Price's offer. Mason, Frank and I will handle the boathouse. As we walked toward the dock, the late morning sun glinting off the water felt surreal. I was a 63-year-old widow who should have been tending her farm, not preparing to search for evidence in a criminal conspiracy. Yet here I was, leading my son and a relative stranger into potential danger because I was the only one thinking clearly. Age had taught me one crucial lesson. Panic is a luxury you can't afford in a crisis. Frank unlocked the boathouse door. Inside, the space looked exactly as it had 5 days ago. Fishing equipment, nets, and the tarp-covered corner. But now, in daylight filtering through grimy windows, I saw details I'd missed before. There, I pointed to the ceiling beams. Fresh scuff marks. Someone's been climbing up there recently. Mason followed my gaze. There's a storage loft. I haven't been up there yet. The ladder looked unstable. It's not, Frank said grimly. I tested it last night. There's more up there. A lot more. We climbed carefully, Mason first, then Frank helping me up. The loft was crammed with boxes, all carefully sealed and labeled with codes I didn't recognize. Mason opened one box, then jerked back as if burned. Oh, God. Inside were bundles of cash, hundreds of them, neatly stacked and wrapped. Beside the cash boxes sat others containing what looked like pharmaceutical packaging, though the labels had been stripped off. How much is here? Victoria's voice came from below. She'd followed us despite my instructions. Millions, Frank said quietly. This isn't small-time smuggling. This is a major distribution hub. Mason's face had gone gray. This was here when I bought the property. I never came up here. I never knew. They know that, I said, fighting my own panic. That's why they're framing you. You're the perfect scapegoat because you're genuinely innocent. Victoria pulled out her phone and started photographing everything. Her hands shaking, but her purpose clear. We need evidence that this was here before Mason bought the place. Timestamps, something. Look at the dust patterns, I said, studying the floor. These boxes have been here for months, maybe longer. See how the dust is undisturbed except for one path, one set of footprints coming and going. Frank knelt, examining the prints. Size 11 work boots. Mason, what size shoe do you wear? 10. And the footprints are older. At least a month, judging by the dust accumulation. Frank stood, his expression a mixture of relief and worry. This is good. This proves someone else has been accessing the loft. It also proves the contraband is real, Mason said hollowly. They didn't plant fake evidence. They left the actual operation intact, knowing I'd take the fall for it. A sound from outside froze us all. A vehicle approaching, far too early to be Sheriff Dalton. Frank moved to the window. Black SUV. It's Harris and Simmons, the fake detectives. They're not supposed to come back until the real deputies arrive, Victoria whispered. Unless they know we're searching, I said, my blood running cold. Unless they've been watching and decided to act now. The SUV doors opened. Harris and Simmons emerged, but they weren't alone. A third man stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed in a gray suit despite the casual lake setting. Even from a distance, I recognized him from Frank's photographs. Raymond Price had come to collect his property. And we were trapped in the boathouse with millions of dollars in evidence that would send my son to prison for decades. We need to get out of here, Mason hissed, his face pale in the dim loft light. Too late, Frank whispered. They're already at the door. Through the grimy boathouse window, I watched Raymond Price and his two accomplices approach. Price moved with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. Harris carried what looked like a briefcase, while Simmons kept one hand inside his jacket, a gesture that made my stomach clench with fear. The back window, Victoria said urgently, pointing to a small opening partially obscured by fishing nets. We could climb down to the water. And go where? Mason demanded. They'll see us immediately. Then we stay, I said, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. We stay, and we face them. Mom, they're criminals. And we're innocents with nothing to hide. I met my son's eyes. Right now, they think we're ignorant of what's in this boathouse. They think they're in control. Let's use that. Frank studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. She's right. If we run, we look guilty. If we stay, we're just a family exploring their property. Exploring a locked boathouse? Victoria's voice cracked with stress. That I unlocked for them as the caretaker, Frank said firmly. Let me handle this. All of you, get down from this loft. Act like we were just checking for water damage or structural issues. We climbed down quickly, my arthritic knees protesting every rung. Mason helped me to the floor just as the boathouse door swung open. Raymond Price stood silhouetted against the bright midday sun, his smile sharp as broken glass. Well, this is convenient. Mr. Caldwell, we meet again. Mr. Price. Mason's voice was steady, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. What brings you out here? Concern for a client. Price stepped inside, Harris and Simmons flanking him like trained dogs. I heard through the grapevine that you might be having some legal difficulties. As someone interested in this property, I thought I should check in. How thoughtful. I moved forward, placing myself slightly between Price and my son. I'm Mason's mother, Sylvia Caldwell, and you're trespassing. Price's eyes flicked to me with amusement. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, I have documentation giving me right of access to this property, a clause in the original sale agreement that your son may have overlooked. He nodded to Harris, who opened the briefcase and extracted a document. Mason took it, his face darkening as he read. This is fraudulent, Mason said flatly. There was no such clause in my purchase agreement. Are you certain? Because the county clerk's office has this version on file. Price's smile widened. Signed by you, notarized and dated. It grants the previous owner's legal representative, that would be me, access to the property for recovery of any personal items left behind. The sophistication of the trap was breathtaking. They'd forged documents and filed them officially, creating a paper trail that would be difficult to challenge. What personal items? I asked, keeping my voice level. As you can see, there's nothing here but fishing equipment. Oh, I think we both know that's not quite true. Price moved deeper into the boathouse, his gaze traveling to the tarp-covered corner. Nathan Garrett left behind some valuable property that legally belongs to his estate, which I represent. Then file a proper claim through the courts, Victoria said, her lawyer's instincts surfacing. You can't just walk onto private property and take things. But I can inspect and document items under the terms of this agreement. Price pulled out his phone. Unless, of course, the new owner is hiding something and would prefer I not look around. It was a perfect trap. Refuse, and we looked guilty of concealing evidence. Allow it, and Price would discover the contraband we'd just found, likely with his fake detectives as witnesses. Go ahead and look, I said before Mason could respond. We have nothing to hide. Price's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected that response. How refreshing. Frank, would you mind removing that tarp? Frank didn't move. I work for the Caldwells now, Mr. Price, not for you. I see. Price's expression hardened. Then I suppose we'll have to… The sound of approaching vehicles cut him off. Through the open door, I saw 2 sheriff's department cruisers coming up the drive, followed by an unmarked sedan. Expecting company? Price asked, his tone sharp now. Actually, yes, Frank said, and I heard relief in his voice. Sheriff Dalton was scheduled to arrive at 1 o'clock. Looks like he brought backup. Price's composure cracked for just a moment. A flash of anger quickly masked. How fortunate. I'm sure the sheriff will be interested in what's hidden in this boathouse. I'm sure he will, I agreed, meeting Price's eyes without flinching. Sheriff Dalton was a stocky man in his 50s, with iron gray hair and observant eyes that missed nothing. He entered the boathouse with 2 deputies behind him, taking in the scene with a single sweeping glance. Mr. Price, he said, his tone neutral. Didn't expect to find you here. Sheriff, I was just exercising my legal right to inspect this property under the terms of the sale agreement. Price's confidence had returned. In fact, your timing is excellent. I believe there may be stolen property hidden here that needs to be recovered. That so? Dalton turned to Mason. Mr. Caldwell, I'm going to need to ask you some questions. Federal agents contacted my office this morning with concerns about this property. I understand, Sheriff, Mason said quietly. But before we go further, there's something you need to know. Something Frank discovered. I'm listening. Frank stepped forward. Sheriff, 5 days ago, I found contraband hidden in this boathouse. I didn't report it immediately because I was trying to figure out who put it there. Mason Caldwell didn't know it existed until this morning. That's a convenient story, Harris interjected. We have evidence that Mr. Caldwell has been making regular trips to this property for months, matching patterns established by the previous owner. Evidence you shouldn't have, Dalton said sharply, his gaze fixing on Harris. Who are you exactly? Detective Harris, Private Investigations. I'm working under contract with me, Price interrupted smoothly. I hired them to investigate potential fraud in the property sale. As the previous owner's attorney, I have that right. And you found what exactly? Dalton's tone had gone cold. Enough to suggest Mason Caldwell knew exactly what he was buying, Price said. A fully operational distribution hub complete with inventory and records, all conveniently hidden where he claims he never looked. Dalton moved to the tarp and pulled it back, revealing the packages underneath. His expression remained neutral, but I saw his jaw tighten. That's a serious amount of contraband. Which we just discovered this morning, I said firmly. Sheriff, someone has been systematically framing my son. Anonymous letters, forged documents, even fake detectives posing as law enforcement. We have evidence of all of it. Mrs. Caldwell, Dalton said gently. I understand you want to protect your son, but nothing. Victoria pulled out her phone, holding it up. I have photographs time-stamped from 20 minutes ago showing the dust patterns in the storage loft upstairs. Footprints that don't match Mason's shoe size. Evidence that this contraband has been here for months, long before my husband bought the property. That could be faked, Simmons said. So could a lot of things, Dalton replied, his attention now fully on Victoria's phone. Let me see those photos. While Victoria showed the sheriff her documentation, I watched Price. His mask of confidence had developed cracks. This wasn't going according to his plan. Sheriff, Price said, his voice taking on a harder edge, I think we're getting distracted from the main issue. There is illegal contraband on this property. The owner is legally responsible regardless of when it was placed here. That's not quite how the law works, Mr. Price, and you know it. Dalton handed Victoria's phone back to her. These photographs are interesting. Very detailed. Almost like someone knew exactly what to document. We did, Frank said, because I've been investigating this property since before Mason bought it. I have records, Sheriff. Records of vehicles that came here in the months before Nathan Garrett's death. Times, dates, license plates. I also have documentation of cash payments made to certain individuals in your department. The air in the boathouse went electric with tension. One of Dalton's deputies put his hand on his weapon, though he didn't draw it. That's a serious accusation, Frank, Dalton said slowly. It's a serious situation. Frank pulled a small notebook from his jacket. I didn't know who to trust, so I kept my own investigation quiet. But now we're out of time. This is absurd, Price snapped. Sheriff, I demand you arrest Mason Caldwell immediately. There's enough evidence here to… Mr. Price, I'm going to need you to step outside with my deputies. Dalton's voice carried unmistakable authority. You too, Harrison Simmons. I need to speak with the Caldwells and Frank privately. You can't be serious, Price said. I have legal standing. You have a forged document giving you false property access, and 2 men posing as law enforcement in my county. Dalton's expression had gone granite hard. Now you can walk out voluntarily, or my deputies can escort you. Your choice. For a moment, I thought Price might refuse. His face flushed with anger, his hands clenching into fists. Harrison Simmons looked ready to escalate the situation into violence. Then Price smiled. A cold, terrible expression that made my skin crawl. Of course, Sheriff. We'll wait outside, but I think you'll find that the federal agents arriving within the hour will have a very different view of this situation. He walked out, Harris and Simmons following. The deputies went with them, leaving Dalton alone with us in the boathouse. The sheriff waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. All right, Frank. You've got about 30 minutes before federal jurisdiction supersedes mine. Talk fast and convince me why I shouldn't arrest Mason Caldwell right now. Because he's not the criminal here, I said, stepping forward. Raymond Price is. He's been using this property for smuggling, probably for years through Nathan Garrett. When Garrett died, or was killed, Price needed to restart the operation, but Mason refused to sell. So Price decided to frame him instead, using Mason's resemblance to Garrett and his legitimate business travels as cover. That's a complicated conspiracy theory, Mrs. Caldwell. It's the truth, Victoria said, and we can prove it. The question is, Sheriff, do you want to help us, or are you going to let a federal case built on fabricated evidence destroy an innocent man? Dalton studied each of our faces in turn. I saw him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding who to trust. Finally, he pulled out his radio. Dispatch. This is Sheriff Dalton. I need you to pull all property records for Lake Thornton filed in the past 2 years. Specifically, anything involving attorney Raymond Price or Lakeshore Ventures Development. Also, get me contact information for the FBI field office. I need to speak with whoever's running the Caldwell investigation. He clicked off the radio and looked at Mason. Son, I'm not arresting you yet, but I'm also not letting you leave this property. You're under informal house detention until I sort this mess out. Understood? Mason nodded, relief and fear warring on his face. Frank, show me everything you've got. Photos, times, dates, all of it. Dalton turned to me. Mrs. Caldwell, I need you to write down everything that's happened since you arrived at this property. Every detail, no matter how small. What about Price? I asked. He said federal agents are coming. Then we'd better work fast. Dalton's expression was grim. Because if the FBI shows up and sees that contraband before we establish a timeline proving Mason's innocence, your son will be arrested on federal smuggling charges, and I won't be able to stop it. Through the boathouse door, I could see Raymond Price on his phone, pacing and gesturing angrily. Whatever he was saying, whoever he was calling, I knew we were running out of time. The trap was closing, and we had less than an hour to prove my son's innocence, or watch him be swallowed by a conspiracy that had been months in the making. Sheriff Dalton set up his makeshift command center in the cabin's dining room, spreading Frank's documentation across the table like pieces of a puzzle. I sat at the kitchen counter, writing furiously, documenting every suspicious detail from the past 5 days. Victoria worked on her laptop, cross-referencing dates and building a timeline. Mason stood at the window, watching Raymond Price pace outside near his SUV, still on his phone. He's calling in reinforcements, Mason said quietly. We're not going to have enough time. Then we make the time count. Dalton studied Frank's notebook, his finger tracing a series of dates. Frank, these vehicle logs? You're sure about these license plates? Positive. I photographed every vehicle that came to this property for 3 months before Garrett died. Frank pulled out his phone, scrolling through images. That silver Mercedes came twice a week like clockwork, registered to Lakeshore Ventures Development. The blue pickup belonged to a man named Curtis Wade. He's got a record for trafficking. And this black SUV, that's Price's vehicle, I said, looking up from my writing. The same one Harris and Simmons drove here today. Dalton's expression darkened. So Price was visiting regularly before Garrett died. That establishes a relationship beyond just attorney-client. It establishes partnership, Victoria said, not looking up from her screen. I've been digging into Lakeshore Ventures. It's a shell company, layers within layers. But I finally traced the primary investor, a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. Want to guess who set up that holding company? Raymond Price, Dalton said. 3 years ago. Victoria turned her laptop around, showing us incorporation documents. He's not just Garrett's attorney. He's the money behind the entire operation. Garrett was the front man, the one who took the risks. Price stayed clean, hidden behind corporate structures. Until Garrett died, I said slowly, the pieces clicking together. Then Price needed a new front man. But Mason refused to play along. So Price decided to turn Mason into an unwitting scapegoat instead. Frank pointed to his timeline. Look at the dates. Mason closed on the property March 15th. 2 weeks later, these anonymous letters started. A month after that, the fake federal investigation began. Price has been building this case methodically, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Which is now, Mason said from the window. 2 cars just pulled up. Federal plates. My heart lurched. Through the window, I saw 2 sedans parking behind Price's SUV. 4 agents emerged, all wearing FBI windbreakers. Price approached them immediately, gesturing toward the boathouse while talking rapidly. We're out of time, Victoria whispered. Dalton stood, his jaw set. No, we're not. I'm the ranking law enforcement in this county, and that boathouse is part of an active local investigation. Federal jurisdiction doesn't supersede mine until I say it does. They won't see it that way, Mason said. Then I'll make them see it. Dalton grabbed his radio. Jenkins, Rodriguez, get out to the boathouse now. Secure that scene and don't let anyone inside, federal or otherwise, until I give the word. He strode toward the door, but I caught his arm. Sheriff, wait. You're walking into an ambush. Price has been planning this for months. He'll have answers for everything, documentation that makes Mason look guilty. What do you suggest, Mrs. Caldwell? That we stop reacting and start controlling the narrative. An idea had been forming in my mind. Risky, but necessary. Price thinks we're desperate and disorganized. Let's use that. Let's give him exactly what he expects, until we don't. Dalton studied me for a long moment. What did you have in mind? I told him. 5 minutes later, we walked out to meet the federal agents as a united front. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, showed her credentials. Special Agent Martinez, FBI. I'm looking for Mason Caldwell. That's me. Mason stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. I understand you have questions about this property. More than questions, Mr. Caldwell. We have evidence suggesting you've been using this location for illegal distribution activities. Martinez gestured to her team. We have a warrant to search the premises. Of course. Mason's response clearly surprised her. I have nothing to hide. In fact, I'd like to show you something in the boathouse that I just discovered this morning. Something that I think will be very relevant to your investigation. Price stepped forward quickly. Agent Martinez, as the attorney representing the previous owner's estate, I should warn you that Mr. Caldwell has been tampering with evidence. I witnessed him in the boathouse earlier, clearly disturbed by what he found. What I found, Mason said calmly, was evidence that I've been framed, and I can prove it. This should be interesting, Price said with a cold smile. We walked as a group toward the boathouse. Agents, deputies, Price and his fake detectives, and my family. I felt every one of my 63 years in my aching knees, but I kept my pace steady, my expression calm. This was the moment everything hinged on. Inside the boathouse, Martinez examined the contraband with professional detachment. This is a significant amount. Mr. Caldwell, you expect me to believe you didn't know this was here? I expect you to look at the evidence objectively, Mason replied. He climbed to the storage loft, Martinez following. Agent Martinez, look at the dust patterns around these boxes. See the footprints? Size 11 work boots. I wear size 10 running shoes. These prints are at least a month old, based on the dust accumulation. That doesn't prove— Look at the boxes themselves, Victoria interrupted, climbing up with her phone. I took photographs this morning with timestamps. The cardboard shows water staining from the spring storms we had in April and May. Mason didn't buy this property until mid-March, and he didn't start regular visits until June. Martinez examined the boxes more closely. I saw her expression shift slightly, doubt creeping in. That's circumstantial at best, Price said from below. Mr. Caldwell could have staged all of this after discovering we were onto him. Could have, I said, pulling out my phone. Except I've been recording conversations for the past 5 days, including the one where you threatened my son to sell this property, and the one where your fake detectives tried to intimidate us. Price's face went white. That's illegal recording. Actually, Virginia is a one-party consent state, Victoria said coolly. As long as one person in the conversation knows about the recording, it's admissible. And I've been documenting vehicle traffic to this property for months, Frank added, showing his phone to Martinez, including Mr. Price's SUV visiting regularly before and after Nathan Garrett's death. Martinez held up a hand. Everyone stopped talking. She looked at Dalton. Sheriff, what exactly is going on here? What's going on? Dalton said. Is that Raymond Price has been running a smuggling operation through this property for years. When his partner Garrett died, he needed to regain control of the location. Mason Caldwell bought it legitimately, refused to sell it back. So Price decided to frame him using Caldwell's resemblance to Garrett and his business travel patterns. That's absurd, Price snapped. I'm an attorney, a respected member of— You're a criminal, I said quietly, and every eye turned to me. And I can prove it. I pulled out a small envelope from my jacket, the one Frank had given me that morning, the one I'd kept hidden until this moment. Inside were photographs, but not the surveillance photos Price expected. These, I said, handing them to Martinez, are photographs taken by Nathan Garrett himself. He kept a personal insurance policy, documentation of his partner's involvement in the operation. Frank found them hidden in his cottage, tucked inside a book Garrett had given him months before he died. Price lunged forward, but Harris and Simmons were suddenly blocked by Dalton's deputies, hands moving toward their weapons. Don't, Dalton said quietly. Martinez studied the photographs. Clear images of Price meeting with known traffickers, handling packages, counting money. The final photograph showed Price and Garrett together at the boathouse, the caption on the back reading, "Just in case my partner forgets who's really at risk here. DG. Garrett was planning to turn on you," Frank said to Price. "That's why he died so conveniently, isn't it? Heart attack with no autopsy, death certificate signed by a doctor who immediately fled the country. You can't prove any of this," Price said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "We don't have to prove all of it," Martinez said, her tone hard now. "Just enough to shift the investigation where it belongs." She turned to her team. "Cuff Mr. Price. Raymond Price, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and suspicion of involvement in trafficking operations. We'll add more charges as we investigate." "This is outrageous," Price sputtered as an agent pulled his arms behind his back. "I'm an attorney. I know my rights. You can't—" "I can and I am," Martinez said. "And gentlemen," she addressed Harris and Simmons, "I'll need to see your real identification. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime." Harris and Simmons exchanged glances, then bolted for the boathouse door. They made it 3 steps before Dalton's deputies tackled them both. In the chaos that followed, Price shouting about lawyers, Harris and Simmons being handcuffed, agents securing evidence, I found myself leaning against the boathouse wall, my legs suddenly weak. Mason appeared beside me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Mom, how did you know about those photographs?" "I didn't, not for certain." I managed a shaky smile. Frank mentioned this morning that Garrett had given him a book months ago, something about lake fish. When I asked to see it, there was a note tucked inside the cover. If anything happens to me, check page 147. The photographs were pressed between those pages like dried flowers. You kept that secret from all of us, Victoria said, appearing on my other side. Even during the meeting with Dalton, I had to. If Price suspected we had real evidence, he would have run or called in more help. I looked at my daughter. Sometimes the best strategy is to appear weaker than you are, to let your opponent think they're winning right up until the moment you prove them wrong. Agent Martinez approached us, her expression softer now. Mrs. Caldwell, I owe you an apology. We were so focused on the financial evidence pointing to your son that we didn't look deeper at who was providing that evidence. You were doing your job, I said. Price is very good at manipulation. He's had years of practice. Well, he just made his last mistake. Martinez glanced at where Price sat handcuffed in the back of a federal vehicle, his face a mask of impotent fury. We'll need statements from all of you. And, Mr. Caldwell, you're not entirely clear yet. But based on what we've seen today, I believe you were targeted rather than complicit. What happens now? Mason asked. Now we tear apart Raymond Price's life piece by piece. Shell companies, financial records, associates, everything. Martinez handed Mason her card. Stay available, but you're free to go. We'll be in touch. As the federal vehicles drove away with Price, Harris, and Simmons in custody, the tension that had held me upright for hours suddenly released. My knees buckled. Mom! Mason caught me, lowering me gently to sit on a dock piling. I'm fine, I insisted, though my hands were shaking. Just tired. Tired? Victoria laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. Mom, you just took down a criminal conspiracy. You outmaneuvered a man who's been playing this game for years. You saved Mason's life. I saved our family, I corrected quietly. That's what mothers do. Sheriff Dalton approached, his expression a mixture of respect and amusement. Mrs. Caldwell, you ever consider a career in law enforcement? We could use someone with your instincts. I'm 63 years old, Sheriff. I think I'll stick to farming. Well, if you change your mind. He tipped his hat. Frank, I'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Those vehicle logs of yours are going to be crucial evidence. As Dalton and Frank walked away, I sat between my children, looking out at the lake. The afternoon sun turned the water gold, and for the first time in days, the beauty of the place wasn't overshadowed by fear. What do we do with the property now? Victoria asked softly. After everything that's happened here, we reclaim it, I said firmly. We don't let Price's corruption poison this place. We clean it out, renovate it properly, and turn it into what it was meant to be. A family retreat where good memories can replace the bad ones. Mason squeezed my shoulder. When did you become so wise, Mom? Age doesn't make you wise, son. Experience does. And I've had 63 years of experience learning that the best weapon against evil isn't violence or wealth. It's patience, observation, and the willingness to act when the moment is right. As we sat together in the fading afternoon light, I realized that this ordeal had given me an unexpected gift. For 2 years since Edward's death, I'd felt diminished, reduced to the role of widow maintaining a farm she no longer had the strength to properly manage. But these past days had reminded me that I was more than my age, more than my circumstances. I was Sylvia Caldwell, and I had just proven that lived intelligence and hard-won wisdom could triumph over youth, arrogance, and criminal cunning. The lake house would survive this darkness, and so would we. 3 months later, I stood on the newly refinished deck of the lake house, watching the first snow of December dust the pines with white. The cabin had been transformed, not just physically, though the renovations Mason and Victoria had overseen were beautiful, but spiritually. The shadow that had hung over this place had finally lifted. Mom, the coffee's ready, Victoria called from inside. I turned from the railing, taking in the warm glow of the cabin's interior. New furniture, fresh paint, and photographs of our family now adorned the walls. The boathouse had been completely gutted and rebuilt, transformed from a den of criminality into a proper storage space for kayaks and fishing equipment. Every trace of Raymond Price's operation had been erased, but the memory of those terrifying days remained sharp in my mind, a reminder of how quickly ordinary life could spiral into nightmare, and how strength could emerge from unexpected places. Inside, Victoria handed me a steaming mug. Frank called earlier. He wanted to make sure we were coming for Christmas dinner at his cottage. We wouldn't miss it. I settled into an armchair near the fireplace, where Mason was building up the flames. How was he doing? Better. Mason added another log, sparks rising. The bonus I gave him helped. He's been able to fix up his cottage properly. But I think what really helped was testifying against Price. Gave him closure. The trial had been swift and decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the photographs, Frank's documentation, forensic analysis of the forged documents, and testimony from several of Price's former associates who'd agreed to cooperate, Raymond Price had accepted a plea agreement. 25 years in federal prison for trafficking, conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other charges. Harris and Simmons had received similar sentences. But the investigation had uncovered something none of us had anticipated. Price's operation had been far more extensive than we'd imagined. The lake house was just one node in a network spanning 3 states. By taking down Price, we'd inadvertently helped dismantle an entire criminal enterprise. Has there been any update on the civil case? I asked. Victoria nodded, pulling out her laptop. The judge ruled in Mason's favor last week. Price's assets, including his share in Lakeshore Ventures, are being liquidated to pay restitution. Mason will recover all his legal fees plus damages. I don't want his money, Mason said quietly. I never did. I just wanted my family safe. Then donate it, I suggested. Turn something evil into something good. Mason looked at me thoughtfully. What did you have in mind? Over the next hour, as snow continued to fall outside, we planned. Mason would use the restitution money to establish a legal defense fund for people falsely accused of crimes. Individuals who, like him, found themselves trapped in situations beyond their control, facing prosecution based on manufactured evidence. We could call it the Second Chance Foundation, Victoria suggested, helping people get the legal representation they need to prove their innocence. I like that, Mason said. It honors what we went through while helping others avoid the same nightmare. A knock at the door interrupted our planning. I opened it to find Sheriff Dalton standing on the porch, snow dusting his uniform hat. Sheriff, come in, I said warmly. We weren't expecting you. Just wanted to check in, see how you folks were settling. He stepped inside, accepting the coffee Victoria offered. And to deliver some news, the FBI finished their investigation into my department. They found 2 deputies on Price's payroll. Both have been arrested. I'm sorry, Mason said. I know that must be difficult. Difficult, but necessary. Dalton's expression was grim. Corruption is like rot in wood. You have to cut it out completely or it spreads. We're better off knowing who we can trust. And Frank? I asked. Is he finally in the clear? Completely. The FBI commended him for his investigative work. Actually, they offered him a consulting position, using his knowledge of the lake community to help with ongoing cases. Dalton smiled. He turned them down, said he was too old for that kind of excitement. I laughed, understanding exactly how Frank felt. Sometimes the quiet life is underrated. After Dalton left, my grandchildren arrived. Mason's teenage boys, Jake and Connor, along with their 12-year-old daughter Emma. Victoria's daughter Emma. They'd been kept away from the cabin during the investigation, shielded from the worst of what had happened. Now, finally, they could experience the place as it was meant to be, a family retreat. Grandma! Emma hugged me tightly. The 12-year-old had grown taller since I'd last seen her. All long limbs and bright eyes. Dad says you're a hero. Hardly, I demurred. I just did what needed to be done. You took down bad guys, Jake said, his 16-year-old face alight with admiration. That's definitely hero territory. Connor, the quieter 14-year-old, approached more slowly. Were you scared, Grandma? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I was scared. Very scared. But being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right, even when you are afraid. How did you know what to do? He asked. I listened. I observed. I thought before I acted. I pulled him down to sit beside me. Your generation is growing up in a world that values quick reactions and instant responses. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is slow down, pay attention, and think deeply about a problem before you solve it. Is that why you didn't tell anyone about the photographs right away? Emma asked, surprising me with her insight. Exactly. If I'd shown them immediately, Price might have found a way to discredit them or create reasonable doubt. By waiting until we had built a complete case, timeline, documentation, multiple witnesses, we made the evidence impossible to dismiss. Victoria watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. Later, as we prepared dinner together in the kitchen, she said quietly, "Thank you, Mom." For what? For showing my daughter, showing all of them, what real strength looks like. Not the kind that comes from physical force or loud voices, but the kind that comes from wisdom and patience. She paused, chopping vegetables. After Dad died, I worried that you were fading away, becoming smaller somehow. I was wrong. You were just gathering your strength. Her words touched something deep inside me. Your father's death changed me, I admitted, but not in the way I expected. I thought I'd be diminished without him. Instead, I discovered capacities I didn't know I had, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And now? Now I know that age isn't about losing power. It's about refining it. All those years of raising children, managing a farm, navigating relationships, solving problems, they weren't just life happening to me. They were training for moments exactly like what we faced this fall. That evening, after a dinner filled with laughter and warmth, I found myself alone on the deck again. The snow had stopped, and stars emerged in the clearing sky, reflected in the lake's dark water. Mason joined me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. Cold out here, Mom. Beautiful, though. I leaned against him, grateful for his solid presence. Mason, I need to tell you something. During those darkest days, when I thought we might lose everything, when I thought you might go to prison for crimes you didn't commit, I learned something important. What's that? That family is more than blood or obligation. It's choice. Every day we choose to protect each other, to believe in each other, to stand together against whatever comes. I looked up at his face, so like his father's. I chose to fight for you because you're my son, but also because you're a good man who deserved someone to fight for him. Mason's eyes glistened in the starlight. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You don't repay me. You pass it forward. When your children need you, when anyone needs you, you do what I did. You stand firm. You think clearly. You act wisely. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not property or money, but the knowledge that intelligence and patience can overcome almost any obstacle. Even criminal conspiracies? Especially those. I smiled. Criminals count on people being afraid, being reactive, being isolated. When you refuse to panic, when you gather information methodically, when you build alliances, you take away their power. We stood together in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the cabin, I could hear my grandchildren's laughter, Victoria's voice joining in. This place, which 3 months ago had been the center of so much fear and darkness, had been reclaimed by light. The next morning, as we prepared to drive back to our respective homes, Frank arrived with a basket of fresh-baked bread from a local bakery. "Thought you could use provisions for the road," he said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Thank you, Frank." I took the basket, then pulled him aside. "I never properly thanked you for everything you did, for trusting me with that information, for keeping records, for standing with us. Mrs. Caldwell, I should be thanking you." Frank's voice grew serious. "I've lived on this lake for 40 years, watched it change, watched people come and go. When Garrett started his operation, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I was just one old man, no power, no influence. You had something better than power," I said firmly. "You had integrity, and courage, and the wisdom to know when to act. I learned that from watching you." He smiled gently. "You showed me that age isn't weakness, it's strength refined by time." As we said our goodbyes and loaded the cars, I took one last look at the lake house. It stood proud and welcoming now, smoke rising from the chimney, icicles glittering from the eaves, a place of peace where there had been corruption, a home where there had been danger. We had done that, not through violence or wealth or legal maneuvering alone, but through patience, intelligence, and the refusal to let fear dictate our actions. During the drive home to my farm, I reflected on how much had changed in 3 months. Mason's consulting business had actually grown. Several clients, impressed by how he'd handled the crisis with such grace, had increased their contracts. Victoria had been offered a partnership at her law firm, partly based on her skilled handling of Mason's civil case. And me? I'd discovered that retirement from one phase of life didn't mean retirement from life itself. When I pulled into my farmhouse driveway, the familiar sight of my land covered in snow brought a swell of emotion. This place, which had felt like a burden after Edward's death, now felt like a sanctuary, a place I'd chosen to keep, to maintain, to love, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. Inside, I found a letter waiting on the hall table, forwarded from Mason's address. The return address made my heart skip. It was from a woman in Ohio whose son was facing trafficking charges based on circumstantial evidence. "I read about your family's case in the news," she wrote. "I don't know if you can help, but I'm desperate. My son is innocent, but we can't afford the lawyers we need to prove it. Is there any way?" I sat at my kitchen table reading her letter 3 times. Then I picked up my phone and called Mason. "The Second Chance Foundation," I said when he answered. "I think we just found our first case." Over the following weeks, as winter deepened and December moved toward Christmas, our family worked together to help the woman in Ohio. Victoria provided legal consultation. Mason funded an investigator. I coordinated communication, drawing on the organizational skills honed over decades of managing a farm and family. It turned out the young man was indeed innocent, framed by a former friend who'd turned informant to reduce his own sentence. The false testimony crumbled under investigation, and the charges were dropped. The woman called me personally to say thank you, her voice breaking with gratitude. "You saved my son's life. I don't know how to repay you." I thought about what I'd told Mason on the deck that snowy night. "You don't repay me. When you have the chance, you help someone else. That's how we change the world, one act of wisdom and courage at a time." Now, on Christmas Eve, I sat by my fireplace with a cup of tea and my journal. I'd started keeping one after the crisis at the lake house, documenting not just events, but the lessons learned. Tonight, I wrote, "I am 63 years old. Society tells me I should be winding down, stepping back, making room for younger generations. But I've learned that age is not decline, it's accumulation. Every year, every experience, every challenge overcome adds to the reservoir of wisdom we carry. When Raymond Price tried to destroy my son, he made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that an older woman, a widow from a small farm, would be easily intimidated or confused. He saw age and assumed weakness. He was wrong. My years gave me patience to wait for the right moment. Experience taught me to observe before acting. Decades of problem-solving showed me how to build alliances and gather evidence. The quiet strength forged through loss and perseverance gave me courage when fear threatened to overwhelm. Raymond Price had youth, wealth, connections, and careful planning. I had something more valuable: lived intelligence and the wisdom to use it. The lake house stands clean now, a testament to the truth that good can triumph over evil, not through might, but through wisdom, not through force, but through patience, not through wealth, but through integrity. This is the legacy I leave my children and grandchildren. That true power comes not from physical strength or youthful vigor, but from the accumulated wisdom of a life fully lived. That age is not something to be feared or dismissed, but respected and utilized. That sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has learned to wait, to watch, and to act with surgical precision when the moment is exactly right. I am 63 years old, and I am just beginning to understand my own strength. Outside my window, snow began to fall again, covering my land in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and my home felt fuller than it had in years. I was not diminished by age. I was refined by it, and I was ready for whatever came next.